I was born 8/24/19 in a little town in Iowa, Churchville, Iowa. On a Sunday morning at 6 a.m. in the morning, and I weighed 12 pounds.
Give us your name here.
Leonard Mckinney.
Okay. So you grew up in Iowa?
Yes. Yes.
But you didn't have any mechanical experience, anything of that sort?
Well, on the farm, you know, everybody's a master mechanic on a farm. You do your own welding and own everything, you know. I used to drive 5 head of horses on a gang plow, 2 16-inch bottom plow. And that was just, after you made a round or two, the horses did all the work. They just knew when to turn. And when they end, I just took my foot and kicked the lever, and the plows came up, and they went on around and headed right back in the right furrow. And I kick it again, the plow will go down and fall on the ground.
Were you on the farm during the Depression?
Yes.
Tell us.
Well, we never was on the farm per se. We lived on the edge of a town, little town of Churchville, Iowa, and it's a town of 100 people. And it was the people around it were all Catholics, seems like, very few Protestants. And of course, I'm a Catholic boy, born and raised Catholic, and so really, I lived on in 4 years of high school. I lived with we rented a house from this farmer, and he couldn't afford the $5 a month rent. So I worked for him and never got a penny for it. And that's where I learned to drive the team of horses and milk the cows and feed the hogs. And every noon we'd come in, and he had one field, an 80 acres field, across the road half a mile away. And I have a story I got to inject here. My sister and I was out had a full 60 acres of wheat. And we were out by the wheat field, and there wasn't a drop of wind, just as calm. And I said, Teresa, do you know there's no wind? No, I said, well, you go down there and I'll go up here and we'll get a hold. And it was full of vine weeds. It was coming over the tops. And so she got a hold of it. I said, now we jerked it back and forth a couple of times, and we got it, and the whole field, the whole 60 acres shook. Now, if you believe that, why, you're a pretty good storyteller.
Yeah.
But that's where I learned most about my farming. And every farmer raised hogs in Iowa. Of course, that's the big farm, hog and pork town. And they have big places in slaughterhouses, and the area around there stinks like crazy. And they'd like to have you get rid of some of the slop, you know. But you wouldn't dare to put it on your garden. It'd be good, but the whole town would stink, you know.
What part of Iowa is Churchville?
It was about 12 or 14 miles south and west of Des Moines.
Okay.
I used to trap skunk when I was a boy, and I trapped 3 skunks. And I let them dry, and I put them on I had a stretcher, and I took them downtown. One day I didn't even tell my mother I was going. I went down I walked to the highway. It was 2 miles, carrying my 3 skunks wrapped in newspaper, and went downtown to the place where they bought them, and I got $5.50 for them. So the first time I went into a restaurant, and got a hot roast beef sandwich for 35 cents. And I ate that, and then I went home. And Mother never even missed me. And I told her where I went. She said, don't you ever do that again to me. She was a good mother.
I want to ask you, the Depression, what was it like? What was it like for you?
Oh, of course, we lived on the farm, and we had a huge garden. My mother had 10 children, and I was the 7th. I always told her I was the luckiest one. There's one of us that I have a sister younger than I am left, and her health is very poor. She has spinal myalgia. She just itches all over. It hurts all the time. But on the farm during the Depression, it was we had her garden, and my mother, she'd drive hundreds and hundreds of gallons or quarts of vegetables. We planted 100 tomato plants and different things like that. and we had cabbage. He made coleslaw. Not coleslaw, but sauerkraut. These big crocks, you know, it's just 10 gallons, 12, 15 gallons, filled out full of cabbage, and then put salt on it, and then board the rock on it, let it ferment. And we'd butcher hogs for our food, you know, meat. But we raised a lot of chickens. We eat a lot of chickens. But on Sunday meal was the best meal was chicken and noodles, and mashed potatoes. And but depression, in those days, of course, they had WPA, they had those, and they had built projects around, built lakes and built things, and give some of the people some work and different things. So about the farm life, I enjoyed that. And I don't know why the old farmer didn't have a bathtub or nothing, you know, and you know, after a while you'd wonder where you have to take a spit bath someplace, you know. And then I stayed there, and then I went to a parochial school. They had a parochial school there and the last year it had to close. They couldn't afford to pay the food for the teachers, you know, sisters, they had nuns. And so I stayed down at his house, and the bus came and picked me up and took me to Martindale to school. And we practiced on the gym, then we could take a shower. That was a duck soup for me, you know. I enlisted in the service of January the 15th, 1942. I went to Chanute Field. No, I went to Shepherd Field, Texas. I'm going to skip a bunch in the middle. About my physical they give me. And well, I'll tell you something about it. We went into this room and they had a carpet on the floor about this wide, and there was 12 of us. And we went in there and they said, take off all your clothes, lay them up under here. They had boxes to put them in. You won't need them no more. And so then they had you said, bend over, pull your cheeks apart. And then they had a man on each side giving shots all at the same time, you know, getting your shots and the whole thing. And then I went from there to Chanute Field. Not Chanute, I went to Shepherd Field, Texas. And they kept us saying, we got to now watch the bulletin board, watch the bulletin board. And they give us they want to know what we wanted to do, and of course I wanted to be a pilot. And I had no college, but that was out. And so our next thing was airplane mechanic. Still, then we watched the pictures, you know, VD pictures. And then in the meantime, we was drilling, trying to teach us how to drill. And then I was there 8 days. My name come on the bulletin board. Shipped to Chanute Field. A barracks that was supposed to go into the classroom got spinal meningitis, and they quarantined them. So we went up there, and I went to AM school for 6 weeks, and then I was chosen to go to Seattle, Washington, to boarding school B-17s. And at that time, I had never seen an airplane, all except these little pea shooters, you know. Never seen a warplane, never. So we got on a train in Chicago, first class Pullman, Seattle. They had built this new field in Florida, where I'm going to tell you about, and they needed men. So I went there, and then I came back, and my wife worked for the Rock Island Railroad. She knew where I was going. She was a teletype operator. She moved troops, and she moved tanks, she moved everything, and worked for the Rock Island in the office. And then she knew when I was coming back from Seattle, and she met me at the train. Her and her sister and her friend. And she gave me a watch to wear. Bought me a watch for a gift. And of course, when I was in Chanute Field, I went to Chicago a couple times, and I had known her better before at her father's funeral, but I hadn't seen her for it. And my aunt my aunt, her Aunt Kate, and my mother were friends. We lived farm by, side by side at the farm. And she said, I'm going to write Leonard and have him come up and see you in Chicago. And we was there, and after a couple of weeks, her old Ford wouldn't run. She said, I know anything about it, so I took off the fuel line, no fuel. So you need a fuel pump. So they scraped together their pennies. They called uptown at the service station, and they had a fuel pump. And how much they scraped together their pennies, and got it. And I put it on, but I forgot to get some gas to prime it. But they had a little gas, so I primed it and it started right up. But it died, so I primed it again and it run. So I said, shut it off. Try it again. Try it again. And when I was doing it, she was so innocent. This lady, my wife, was so innocent. Her eyes was that big, and between that, when the hood was up, there was that much room between us. She was up there, a little watching every move I made. So I looked up and seen her, and I winked at her, see. And boy, her face got red. I don't know if this is interesting or not, but this happened. And so I got back to Chicago, and they put the same train, same Pullman on a Southern Railroad train. And I took that same train clear down to Sebring, Florida, first class. And it took 2 days and a half to get from Florida to Chicago on a furlough, And I ended up at Sebring, Florida. And the town, they built a new field just for training B-17 pilots. And that's where I spent the rest of my time. My work included my first ride on a B-17. We went down on the line, and the boy that was supposed to fly engineer, he had a date that night, and they chose him to fly. It was his turn to fly. So he says, "Well, you've been to Boeing school. You know all about this airplane." He said, "You just take it from me." So I find out. He said, "You don't do nothing, just ride along." So I said, "Okay." So I got on it. And I was sitting in the railroad room that turned on the radio, and I was listening to the pilots say, "Close it up, close it up." And I said, "What are they talking about?" So I go back to the waist gunner, and here we are flying in formation with 11 other airplanes. And that was the biggest thrill of my life. You see all that, me up there in the air on the B-17, never seen a warplane in my life. And that was the biggest plane built at that time. B-29s come on, that was another story. But so I wrote and told her what happened, and my duties were primary mechanic. Those airplanes, every 50 flying hours, you had a 50-hour inspection. Cowling and everything come off, and you re-safety them because they'd all work loose, tighten everything up, and then we'd fly them another 50 hours, which would take only. See, we flew them 15 hours, we flew them 5 hours, 15 hours a day. The same airplane flew 15 hours a day, so 3 times 15 is 45. But 3.5 days, 3 1/3 days, it'd be due for a 100-hour inspection. And then we did more work on them then. But that's the way the work went on at the line. And they kept track of the engine time and the power time. We didn't have to do that. The office did it. And
so this was a constant stream of...
just like being home in mechanics, You say, do this or do that, and the ratings come out periodically. And then I went down on the line one day, and our Major Frost, his name was, he was an engineering officer, a 4/5 of our outfit, and he was a flight instructor. He had a rope tied onto the prop. He had the dome off and everything, and the thrust nuts were off. He got 2 of them, he took that off. He couldn't get the prop off. And I said, "Major, what do you got that? What are you trying to do? If you want to tow that airplane, there's tow hooks down there by the wheels." And he says, "Well, you're a smart ass." He says, "I'm trying to get the prop off." I said, "Well, Major, sir, if you will unhook your Jeep rope and give me a 3/8 offset wrench, with the side cutters and a long nose pliers. I'll take that off for you in less than 5 minutes if you'll make me a sergeant. And okay. So he stood on my shoulder. I said, I need a grease rag. I wiped the grease off. There's a little bar about so wide and about so thick, about that long, that slid in the prop shaft. You know, there's about that big around. And I cut the safety wire and took the long nose pliers and pulled it out. Took the wrench and unloosened it and unscrewed it and slid the bar over. Then went on the other side, did the same over there. Then I took hold of the block blades off and up. I said, how long did it take me? He said, 4 minutes. I said, now you're going to hold up your bargain? He said, that was your duty. And so the time went on, and about a month later he come by and he was flying my airplane with a bunch of new students. And I said, well, hello, Corporal. I said, Major, sir, thank you. He said, I see you made Corporal. I said, thank you. So, and when are you going to teach me how to fly, sir? He said, right now. He said, you were good to me. Right now, get up there in the co-pilot seat. And he taught me to fly that airplane. And I took it off. Of course, I never missed a trick when we was there. But somebody had to be on the airplane for flying engineer. And so I watched every move they made, you know. And I sat in the pilot seat. And I said, you handle the radio. And he said, okay, taxi out. So I taxied out and stopped. And it had locked the tail wheel, see. Otherwise it'd go like this, it'd lock it. Okay, clear to take off. And I took that feather off. And I stayed on the runway and it lifted, I had the flaps were down and lifted the plane right up. And went up about 800 feet and I grew back on there. And he said, you never flew this before? I said, no. I've watched you, I've watched them fly, you know. And I was a dumb farm boy from Iowa, you know. And then we went around and I watched them when they went to get to landing. You know, they kind of let it float in. They didn't fly it in like this. They let it float in. And we dropped down to 800 feet. And I slowed her down. And I said, call off every 100 feet drop and the airspeed. When they get close to the ground, every 50 feet drop in the airspeed. And they did. And I got down there, you know, I sat down, I only bounced it about that far. He said, that's great. And so I took my turn in the run, and then as the time went on, the pilots knew that I could fly. And once in a while they get a student that was a little slow, and they had me fly engineer. And they'd always holler back, they'd say, Sergeant, I was a sergeant by that time, Sergeant, did you ever fly this airplane? I said, no, never flew this airplane. He said, see if you can show this man anything about flying. So I went in there and I just thought, I could set that down right on there. And I said, he said, that was not bad, that was good. And it helped, you know, it helped those students. They see a dumb sergeant could do that. I don't know why I couldn't do that. And, but finally the word got out, so everybody knew that I could fly. Everybody else wanted to learn to fly, but they never did teach nobody else.
When you were working on the B-17s, were there any parts of the B-17s that gave you any particular problems, or were they easy planes to work on? You talked about how much you had to rebuild them.
Well, we had a sub-depot there too. Of course, they even took the tough stuff, they did it. But and we never got shot at. And we never lost no cables or anything like that. If you had to have a special tool to restrain new cables, which would have been quite a chore, but we never had that. Mostly on engines and superchargers. Now we had toward the last 2 years in the service there on the 17, they came out with an electronic supercharger. And we knew nothing about it, so they sent I and another sergeant to Minneapolis, by Fort Snelling, and we went to supercharger school. And they put up the orders on a bulletin board 2 days before payday. And of course, the payday, I had $2 in my pocket. And here I'm going to go to Minneapolis and no money. So I walked through the day room, and they had a crab game going on there. And I was standing there, and this guy was shooting. He was trying to get a hard number, you know. I don't know what number it was, 9 or something. And he said, "I'll bet you 5-2 that I make it." So I said, "I'll take it." So I took it, and I won. And I sat there by that table for a while, and I got $200 I made. And then I took that, mostly all $1 bills, you know, and I took that, and then I went to Minneapolis. And, well, it was St. Paul, really. And it was 400 miles from there to Chicago. And we were married. We got married during the war. And my wife got on a 400 train. It took her 400 minutes to get from Chicago to St. Paul. And I met her at the train, and we went. I had a reservation at the hotel, and we went to the elevator to get it, and here comes the police, stopped us. This is a decent hotel. You can't just take anybody up there. I said, "I have a reservation." I said, "We're married." So Catherine's sister had a thing that she reduced the wedding license down to that's pocket size, and with a cellophane on it. So I took it off. I said, they let us go. So Catherine was there for 2 days, and then she went back. She worked for the railroad all that time.
Well, getting back to, you know, Florida, you must have seen an awful lot of young pilots come through there.
Yes.
With the aircraft, did the aircraft stay there for his
Yes,
training?
yes. Every now and then we started with C's and D's, which they had inertia starters. You know, you wound them up, they bound around the bands up tight, and then when you got them up tight, you held your finger up and pull the crank out, and the pilot would release them, and that would spin the prop. And most generally it would start, but sometimes it was a stubborn one, and after about the third time on there, you couldn't do it no more. You wore out, widening that up. And then they would replace them with later models. And the F's and G's, we had a lot of. We had 60 F's and G's. And the day the war was over, they flew in a B-17G for us, you know. Well, hell, the war was over. I don't know what they did with that. Flew it out. And when the war was over, we took the airplanes out and had to fly around the hump, you know. We wouldn't let us fly across the Gulf, because we was down, and flew them to Kingman, Arizona, parked them out there in the field in the desert. Now don't strip them, don't take anything off them. That was an invitation to take them. Well, I took a few things off.
Got to have something as a memory from it.
Yeah, and I gave them to my son the last time he was home. And he was so pleased. I said, "They's been here in my drawer long enough. Would you like to have them?" Well, he said, "That bag that," he said, "that the compass." He said, "Man, this still works. Perfect." It was in a raft, you know. They had for rafts for if you landed a ditch in the ocean or water or something. But I was discharged in Chinook Field. They shipped me from Florida to Chinook Field because I lived in Chicago. And I was only supposed to get $200 muster and out pay, but they sent me the extra $100. I kept it.
Why not?
Well,
By all means. You're going to give you $100.
Yeah.
Who would you decide?
And my base pay, when I got to be staff sergeant, was $96 a month. I had a hash mark. That paid us. I paid $4 a month. That made $100. And then for flying pay, I got half of that, so I got 50% off of that. I made $150 a month much of salary. The last year I was in the service.
People don't understand that was money.
Those days, it was a lot of money.
What'd you do after the war?
I came home. I went to I was married, and I came home, and I sat around for a couple of weeks, and my wife said, well, you better get a job. He says, you know. And so her father died when she was 16. And he was working in Chicago, or Calumet City, in a soap factory, but they were changing it over then for war materials. And somebody had sent somebody up to turn the valve, they turned the wrong one, and it got an explosion, and his right kidney never healed. And when it turned him clear black, and he thought he was a black man. So after he was there a while, he said, well, this is a white man. So they took him out of the black ward, and he got better treatment. Yeah. Yeah, they had Ku Klux Klan around when I was a boy. People didn't like Catholics, and they call them as the Ku Klux Klan. Yeah.
Did they bother much, or were they?
No, they just raised Cain. Just holler and hoop and holler, and finally they got rid of them. But they would set houses on fire and stuff like that.
That's more than raising Cain.
Yeah, yeah,
That's pretty brutal.
yeah.
What have you done since the war? What kind of work?
Well, I was got a job as a fireman. I told you I was a fireman on the railroad, and so I told him to stick to the job where the sun didn't shine. And then I went down to the get a carpenter's union, got a union card for the carpenter. Then I worked and they used 1x6s for subfloor and 1x6s for everything, you know. And that took a lot of work. But then after a while, they bought 80 acres of land, and they went down through there with a bulldozer, and then they went in and put in the footings, and there was a poured cement on the outside. And then we come along, they pushed some dirt in, so sometimes we'd have to walk in on planks, and we'd put the subfloor down, or the ceiling, the floor joist, and then they'd build it up. And finally I got to be pretty handy with the tools. And there was no power saw, no power equipment allowed to use, union would let you use no power equipment, all hand. Everything was done by hand. And then it came time for the lath and plaster. The lath and plaster, there was no drywall, it was lath and plaster. And where the kitchen walls was, they always had that much plaster on the bottom, and there were metal cabinets, and how you couldn't get them set up close to the wall or nothing. So they were made so you could bang them in on the bottom and set them up pretty close. And then they finally let me go in there, and there was no basement steps in, and I had people that told me how to do it, and so the first thing I did, I got the planks, and the horses, you know, I cut them out by hand and made steps down there, and the foreman came in, and he said, who put the steps in? I said, I did. Well, he was pleased. So I had to trim out that whole house. First thing he did, he laid the floor. Everything had oak floor all the way through the house, kitchen and their wall. And then you trimmed the house all out. And then they had the casings around the windows. You know, now they have drywall and metal corners on them. But they were all cased with wood, and it all had to be mitered, you know. And we call them gasoline fit, you know, gasoline wouldn't run through them. And I did that, and then finally Catherine was from Chicago, from Des Moines, born and raised in Des Moines. And I said, why don't we move back to Des Moines? She said, I think I can get transferred back there. So she did, and they transferred her back there, and I went back there and joined the union back there. And I worked for the big boys back there, that built big buildings. Lovejoy, and Lovejoy built schools. And I got so, you know, they have 4 or 5 doors in front of these schoolhouses. They put me to hang those doors. They were 7-foot doors, 3-inch thick oak doors. You take a man and a boy to hang those things, you know. But anyway, I got them hung, and then the handles you pushed in, you know, Why, you drill a hole down here and the bolt will come over in here, you'd have to figure that all out, you know. You didn't make a mistake.
So,
And that's what I did.
have you, go ahead.
No, go ahead and ask the question.
I was just gonna say, did you ever get back to anything with airplane mechanics or anything of that sort?
No, I took a service station and I applied my mechanic skill to that. And that's when everything was free. You checked their tires free, you did this free, and you did all that free. And they bitched their head off if you had to charge them a quarter for something, you know.
What's it like seeing a B-17 out here today, and what kind of memories does that bring back for you?
All my time in the service, in Sebring, Florida, I remember everything they did. Shoot, they built us of course, a B-17. I knew that plane from one end to the other. And I could fly it. But when you got out of the service, you just forgot it all. Everybody was in. Everybody was in the service. And he was to do this, and he did that, and you know, he was so sick and tired of it, you know, nobody ever talks about it. Until I went to exercise class in '02 in Denver, in Arvada, 68 something Wadsworth with silver sneakers. And I got in there, and Lucky was there. You know Lucky. Lucky was there, and a fellow by the name of John, and they was talking about it. And I said, that's not true. What do you mean that's not true? I said, you didn't do it that way. Of course, Lucky was a gunner, and he didn't know about the mechanics of it. Well, what do you know about him? So that's where it started. From that day on, well, I've interviewed, given my story so many times, and I've been to Europe. Timothy Davis took me to Europe in '04, '07, fully funded first class. I tell you, that was a trip of your life. I never forgot that, never will. I learned for all this here. They had fields of it. It was green, it hadn't gotten ripe yet. They called it rape. And they made benzoyl oil out of it. Now in Canada, they make diesel oil out of it. And things like that. And then there's a terrain, you know, instead of having, furrows like they do here or in Iowa we did there, so the rolling hills wouldn't all wash away. They planted trees down there. And Tim Davis was sitting by me in there. And I said, Tim, you see those trees down on the side of that hill? What are they on there for? I said, so for erosion. And over there they have lots of berries. They don't waste an inch of ground. The fence rows, you know, here they get that far from the fence, that's the closest you get. All the weeds are cut out there and they're planted in berries. You always had a big plate of berries every day to eat, but no meat. I had no meat because of hoof and mouth disease. I thought we was going to get some fish, you know, some bass or something to catch them out of that English Channel. But they're full of bass over there, but we didn't have any. And I hate yogurt. And they had some kind of a deal, some kind of a deal. I looked at, they put menus on the table, you know, 3 or 4 of them. So I brought them home once to show my wife. And one of it had yogurt on it. And I said, oh my God. But I tasted it, I couldn't taste the yogurt. It went down all right. They had it mixed up.
So you've been involved with the Greatest Generation. You worked with Timothy.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we got home, he thanked us for taking the trip and so forth. And then a little bit later, they said if you wanted, you could make a donation. $350, they give you a DVD of the first trip they took and something else. So I donated $350. And then they wanted every so often they wanted money, you know. Well, you know, I'm going to be 90 years old and I don't have no retirement funds coming in. I was self-employed all the time. And what money I had saved, why, it's gone. I bought my house I'm living in now in 1946, 45. It's a brick house, bi-level for $17,700. And that's what I'm living on. I got a reverse mortgage on it. I take $500 a month. With long, I get, my wife gets money from her employment. Of course, she had to quit working. If she had been working up to the time she died, she'd have got what I get now. But we do very well.